Welcome to another edition of Inside the Game. I'm Pierre McGuire. I'm so happy to be joined by longtime Pittsburgh Steeler executive, two-time Super Bowl champion, Kevin Colbert. Kevin, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Pierre. It's always good to connect and catch up.
You know what's amazing? Today is the one-year anniversary of the passing of our good friend Ray Shero. And what's interesting to me is Ray introduced you and I in Pittsburgh. And I remember meeting you at a theater in downtown Pittsburgh and just talking about hockey and football and all these different things with you. And it seems like it was yesterday.
Yeah, I believe we were at the, it was the NHL draft was in town that year, and we met over at the August Wilson Center. And, you know, Ray was just that personable, lovable friend. And, you know, we met professionally when he came to Pittsburgh. I had reached out to him like I did usually when a new GM would hit town, and was able to join up with Ray and Karen and for a nice dinner with my wife Janice, and then we just built a friendship. But we also, beyond the friendship, we also did a lot of professional interaction, a lot of professional sharing of thoughts and ideas and how to go about our businesses.
He was so full of admiration for how you did do your business. So that's going to be part of what we're going to talk about today, how you did your business for almost 5 decades in the National Football League. And let's start with your beginning at North Catholic High School in Pittsburgh. When did you know you wanted to be a football guy, in high school or afterwards?
Well, you know, I wasn't a very good player, so I had to start focusing on what were some other options. And the North Catholic community, that's where the Rooney family went to high school as well. So what Art Rooney Jr., the former, you know, they didn't call him a GM back those, but Art put together all those 70s teams along with Coach Noel. But what he used to do, he would hire high school coaches to supplement their scouting offices because they weren't big staffs. And he would give them professional film to evaluate and grade. And then from those, he would hire men or recommend men to Jack Butler, who headed up Blesto, which was headquartered in Pittsburgh. And he recommended a lot of those guys to Jack, who eventually moved on into the NFL scouting world. And my high school coach, Ron Hughes, was one of those gentlemen. So I was fortunate enough just to get passed along through that system.
You'd get through that system, and then you go take a job with the Miami Dolphins, and you're working with arguably one of the greatest football minds of all time, and Don Shula. What was that experience like?
You know what? It was kind of like, what am I doing in this room with Coach Shula? You know what? I'm just like a little overwhelmed, but you know, with Coach Shula, it was very direct. I mean, he was demanding on everybody, and I'm talking about from a low-level scout like myself to his coordinators. And you know, Coach demanded information. He demanded interaction, and he challenged you. And if you didn't accept that challenge to provide an opinion, then you know he wasn't going to value you too much. But if you did provide an opinion, you had to have evidence to back it up. He just didn't want somebody saying, "Hey, he's a good player." Well, why is he a good player? So I learned to get very detailed because that's what Coach Shula was demanding.
What matters most in football? Is it the numbers? Is it the physicality? Is it coachability? Is it the character of the person? What matters the most when you're evaluating a player?
You know, Pierre, I don't think it's unique to football. I think it's unique to any personnel evaluation, hockey, basketball, baseball, the business world. It's that intangible part that can't be measured. You know, and you and I didn't grow up in an analytic world, and I respect it. But boy, if you can't judge the person, if you can't judge what's going to happen within that mindset, that framework, that character, that heart, well, if you misjudge those, that's where you'll make mistakes. And that's where, when I look back and we'd evaluate each draft pick each year, over time, and you know, the mistakes we made are when we misjudged the hearts and the smarts. And that was the part that you can't measure it, but you got to feel it. And I think, you know, if you can feel it, you have a better chance. The football part, the film, the practice, all that stuff was easier because it was measurable. But that part you can't measure. That was the part that was challenging.
What's amazing, Kevin, I want to back you up on this, just to take everybody inside the decision-making process of a football general manager. I will never forget, I think I was in California and my phone rang and it said your name. So I was like, that's interesting. Hey, Kevin, it's Pierre. Hey, Pierre, I know you played football at Hobart College. Do you know a kid named Ali Marpet? And I said, I know who he is, but I don't know him personally. What's up? And he said, we're thinking about signing him or even drafting him. And I said, well, do you want me to make some calls? And you said, yeah. So I picked up the phone. I started calling some of my old coaches that lived in Geneva, New York. And I gave you an update on where Ali was. And eventually he doesn't end up a Steeler, but he ends up a Tampa Bay Buccaneer and he wins a Super Bowl. So you were on this guy who was a Division III All-American way before I'm going to bet most people were. How did that name come to you?
Well, I mean, you know, I go all the way back to the Blusto, the scouting group. You know, they're kind of like your NHL scouting bureau. They provide the initial information, and they had him evaluated. We didn't pick up on him though until the Senior Bowl when we were starting, because I believe we had one scout maybe watch a video on him, but until you got around him and watched him participate in the practices against the better competition, you don't really know. When those guys are at a lower level, you don't know because they should dominate a Division III level if they're going to be a professional prospect. But when you get them in a Senior Bowl type setting, an East-West type setting where they're going against NFL caliber people and they don't look out of place, then you're like, no, I think this guy belongs. You know, in today's world, he probably would have ended up playing at a higher level with the transfer portal and NIL and rev share and so on and so forth. But he did that at the Senior Bowl, and that made him into an NFL prospect. But I believe he ended up getting 9 or 10 years in the league.
He did, and a Super Bowl too. It's so funny because we talked about our friend Ray Shero, our common friend Ray Shero. I remember calling him up after you called me, and I said, Ray, you're not going to believe this. Kevin called me about a kid that plays at Hobart. He goes, he's thorough, man. I'm telling you, he's thorough. So I thought that was so good and so appropriate to share that story with you because I wanted you to know, because now I understand you're a consultant at Colorado State on the football side of things. Is that accurate?
I did Colorado State last year. I won't be, with them this coming season. They changed their coaching staff, and I had a chance to stay, but I just felt it was a good time to move on into some different endeavors. I do some work with Ohio State evaluating their draft eligible players and giving them an opinion as to whether they should enter the draft or, stay for more development and so on and so forth. So right now, that's the only college I'm working with. The rev share salary cap stuff that they're all learning. There's some opportunities to maybe help in that, but again, the colleges are just trying to sort all that stuff out.
Can you believe how much it's changed since you went to Robert Morris or I had gone to Hobart or any of those schools, whether they're big or small? It's unbelievable, Kevin, how much it's changed.
And I think it's great that the players are getting compensated. However, everybody has to come up with a more sustainable model because the one that's working now, it's not sustainable. The big guys are always going to be able to get the best players because a lot of the NIL stuff doesn't count against the cap. So there's ways to manipulate it, and again, it's not sustainable. But on the flip side, it can help mid-range programs because they can maybe siphon off some talent from the bigger schools. The bigger schools will always still get the top players, but that mid-range talent that used to provide depth at the bigger schools might get siphoned off into the mid-range schools. So there's a lot of good to it, but boy, we have to come up with a more sustainable model because I just don't think it can be sustained at this level.
Yeah, I know you're a proud son of Pittsburgh, and I feel so blessed to have called Pittsburgh home for a bunch of years, and obviously we were fortunate to win, much like you were. When I was in Pittsburgh, I worked for Craig Patrick, a Hockey Hall of Famer, Bob Johnson, a Hockey Hall of Famer, and Scotty Bowman, a Hockey Hall of Famer. And we had so many Hall of Famers that played for us at that time. And I look at your track record in Pittsburgh, and after Chuck Noll, and all the great football players that have been there. Do you ever have to pinch yourself and say, I can't believe I was part of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm a son of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I mean, I do, and that's again when we were talking about Coach Shula, like I don't really belong in this. It's kind of like that old Muppets, one of these things doesn't belong with the other, and I'd look around and say, wait a minute, I don't know if I fit into this. But again, with the Steelers, I never worked with Coach Noel, but Mr. Dan Rooney, Hall of Famer, Coach Bill Cowher, Hall of Famer, Coach Mike Tomlin, soon to be Hall of Famer if he, whenever he steps away from the game completely. We had Coach Dick LeBeau sitting in the room with us. We had Russ Grimm, our offensive line coach, sitting in there with us. We had the great Bill Nunn sitting in that room with us, and we were maybe talking about an Alan Faneca or a Troy Polamalu or a soon-to-be Hall of Famer and Ben Roethlisberger. So we were surrounded. I was very blessed to be surrounded by a lot of great people, and the organization was unique in that manner. And again, I picked up some stuff from those guys along the way.
Oh, I think you helped them too. One of the big parts of this show, Inside the Game, is to give people an idea about leadership, decision making, how you go about doing those things. And so let's start with Bill Cowher. I don't believe you hired him, you inherited him, but you won with him. What made Bill Cowher a really good football coach?
Coach Cowher was a very, much like Coach Shula, he was a very detailed, very demanding, but he was very good with the players too. He knew how to extract the very best out of each guy, and he was the very same way in our meetings. Again, having been around Coach Shula, there was part of Bill that was really reminiscent of Coach Shula because Coach Shula, Bill Cowher's mentor was Marty Schottenheimer, who spent time with Coach Shula. So it was really an extension of that same tree. But when I came to Pittsburgh, Bill and I are the same age. We had 3 kids each, and his kids were a year younger than ours. So we had a lot in common. He grew up on the west side of town. I grew up on the north side of town. Didn't know him until we both got into the NFL world. But what Bill was able to teach me, not more football technical type stuff, but he taught me about the Steelers. And when you come from an organization, and we had some success in Miami, we had some success when I was with the Detroit Lions. But again, coming home to Pittsburgh, Bill taught me this is how the Steelers go about this. And it's probably a little more unique. Again, the Rooney family, second to none in what they demanded of an organization. And Bill not only taught me some football, but he also taught me this is how the Steelers do it. It may be a little bit different than what you're used to.
So Bill decides to leave. You win a Super Bowl with him. You beat Seattle, I believe, in that Super Bowl in 2006. And you have to make a coaching decision, and you hire Mike Tomlin. How hard is it as a manager to go from a Super Bowl winning coach to a coach that's never been a head coach at the pro level? How did you know that Mike Tomlin was the right guy for you?
It was a very long process. And again, Coach Cowher, when he retired, we didn't know if he was stepping away from the game completely. Now he's entering, I think, year 22 in the TV business. So good for him. But when he stepped away, we were 1 year removed from the Super Bowl, and Coach was only 49 years old. But he felt for himself, for his family, it was the right thing to do. So we were faced with the challenge of trying to replace not one Super Bowl coach, but really you're following a legacy of Chuck Noll and Bill Cowher. So, it was I don't want to say it was a simple process, but it wasn't complicated where we used any outside sources. The Rooneys asked me to compile a list of candidates. And, I went about it. I showed them, I said, look, here's 37 people. Ex-NFL head coaches, about to be ex-NFL head coaches, coordinators, offensive and defensive, and college possibilities. And, quickly we could take that down to, we took that down to 15. Okay, let's get realistic. Okay, we pared it down to 15, took it down to 5, that we interviewed. And of course, we hired Coach Tomlin. And the one commonality, and I can't say we went into it with this commonality in mind, but Mike was a young defensive coordinator from outside the organization. When we look back, Bill Cowher was a young defensive coordinator with the Kansas City Chiefs from outside the organization. And Coach Noll was a young defensive coordinator with the San Diego Chargers outside the organization. So that was that commonality that we found in Coach. So it just, the first time you met Mike, you were very impressed, almost to a point of like, he can't be that good. And then the second time we sat down and talked and shared some football interaction, and it was pretty evident that Coach Tomlin was going to be a special coach. And it was just a matter of going through the process. And the group that we had, 4 of those 5 became the interviewees. 4 of those 5 became head coaches. 2 or 3 of them coached in the Super Bowl, and 1 won the Super Bowl, and that was Coach Tomlin.
What an amazing story. I love how you talked about how Coach Cowher taught you the Steeler way, so to speak. Did you have to do that with Mike Tomlin? Did you have to teach him the Steeler way?
Absolutely, because Coach is coming, but he had gotten some of that because he had worked with Coach Dungy in Tampa. So Coach Tomlin had heard about the Coach Knowles, the processes and what Coach Dungy had learned from Coach Noll and passed on to Mike. But once Mike got in the building, he brought a lot of great outside concepts. But like Coach Cowher helped me understand the Pittsburgh culture, I did that with Coach Tomlin. And a little quick story, we went to a Penguin game the night he was here for his interview. And we're up in D22, grabbing a hot dog and a Coke in between periods. And I said, Coach, if we hire you and you win, you're not going to be able to do this. And I said, if we hire you and you lose, you're not going to want to do this. So let's appreciate this moment. And, Mike, he was very adaptable to that outside world of understanding people. Mike had a great people process that he was very natural at. But Mike was a lot like Coach Cowher in a very detailed, old school approach. They were both young coaches when they came into it, and I wasn't with Bill when he was young as a head coach, but with Coach Tomlin, I was. And again, he brought a lot of outside influence, but he also gave us, or I was able to give him, hey, this is what Pittsburgh Steelers, and this is what Pittsburgh is like.
When I came to work in Pittsburgh, the owner of our team was the DeBartolo family, who I know from the San Francisco 49ers. But Mr. DeBartolo, I'll never forget it. We won the Stanley Cup in '91, and I got this handwritten note in my mailbox. So I was shocked. I read it, and it was a really nice manuscript, and it was from Mr. DeBartolo Sr. I'm just curious, they're a legendary football family. They're a legendary family from Youngstown, Ohio, the DeBartolos. What was it like to work for the Rooneys?
You talk about Mr. DeBartolo like that with the personal touch. When I came in for my original interview with the Steelers, Art Rooney II, who is the current president of the team, he conducted the interview. Mr. Dan Rooney, who at that time was the president, Art was a VP at that point, I'm sorry, but Mr. Rooney wasn't going to be in town. And I get a call the night before the interview, and it's Mr. Dan Rooney, and he's calling to wish me luck. And I was like, wait a minute, you're wishing me luck? And, he was apologetic that he wasn't going to be there. But that was kind of that first experience where you could see the real demeanor of this family. Now, again, they were very detailed, very demanding. The expectations are high, but they gave you that natural feel for these are good people, and you're going to want to do good for them. And again, that was passed on the very first time. And then the next time I came in for the second interview, Mr. Rooney took me to the Rosa Villa, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Sir.
right down the street from the stadium. And it was like we're having lunch and I'm getting interviewed and I'm like, this doesn't feel like an interview, but I'm sure during that lunch, he was figuring out whether or not I'd be able to fit in. And fortunately, I was hired and, it was great.
Kevin, what does it mean to be a Pittsburgher and come back and run such an iconic franchise? What did it mean to you and your family?
Sometimes you sit back and you think about it and it's a little bit surreal. And sometimes it just doesn't seem like it happened. You have to remind yourself, and Coach Cowher used to talk about that. When you're in the moment, you don't think about it. And he said, you'll never appreciate it until you get outside of it. And I think I was like that. When you're in the moment, you can't think. You're worried about the next scouting trip, the next game, the next decision. But when you step away and you reflect and you're like, oh, wait a minute, that was pretty cool. Like right now we're watching as the draft is getting ready to come to Pittsburgh. And you think about it and I was like, wow, did all this stuff go on when I was sitting in draft meetings? Because you don't understand how big that process can be. So you sit back and you appreciate it because you didn't get to appreciate it. I'm sure when you were working, you're not thinking about, hey, wait a minute, we're the Pittsburgh Penguins. We won a Stanley Cup. We might win another one. You're not thinking about that. You're thinking about how are we going to do this? How are we going to go about this? We don't have time to appreciate it. Now you sit back and you're like, oh yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was just in Pittsburgh 2 weeks ago for Mario's fantasy camp, and I actually walked around downtown one day, and I was like, I can't believe we had a parade here. And it was pretty cool. I'll
Yeah.
share this with you. I'll never forget my first day of training camp, 1990. I'm walking from the Vista Hotel, which is a Westin now, up to the old Igloo in Pittsburgh. And it was a little bit humid. It was probably early September. And I'm walking up the hill and I started to perspire. I'm by myself and I'm like, darn it. I'm going to look really bad. It's the first day of training camp and I'm already sweating. They're going to think I'm nervous. And I'm a young guy. I'm 28 years old, 29 years old. And I walked in the door and I'll never forget the late Bob Johnson said to me, how come you're so sweaty? I was so embarrassed. I didn't know what to say. So I said, Coach, I was working out and I took a hot shower and I was like, yeah, I bull pooped my way right through that. What was it like? I got to ask you this. You talked about all the great coaches that have been through Pittsburgh. The alumni of the Pittsburgh Steelers is amazing. It's a who's who. And you drafted some of them. You were obviously the manager of some of them. You inherited some of them. What's it like to be around that group? Because our group with the Penguins, it's amazing to be around. What's it like to be around your Steeler group?
Yeah. And, when I was talking about being in that draft room, I hesitate to say I left Joe Green out of that conversation because after Joe played and coached, Mr. Rooney approached me and said, hey, I'm thinking about adding Joe to your scouting staff. Can you fit him? Can he be part of the group? And I was like, of course. But Joe was as a scout, he was as hard on himself as he wanted me to be demanding of him. He never wanted to be treated any different, never wanted to be asked to do any less than any of the other scouts were doing. And, the more time you spent with Joe, the more you realized that, boy, when he sat back and gave you a lesson and a reminder of the Pittsburgh Steelers legacy and how fortunate he was to be a part of it and how fortunate we should all feel, you sat and you listened. And Joe would give you respectful opinions. And, he was very, very good at that. But again, would have different events. Okay, Mel Blunt's knocking on the door. Different guys showing up at different times. Jack Ham, interacting with Jack Lambert, playing some, we played some recreational hockey. Jack used to skate.
Oh,
And
do I ever know?
Yeah, and we get into some of those, pickup games down at the arena. But again, just being around those guys and understanding who those guys were on a day-to-day basis and still being part of it, again, you kind of shook your head, as I'm sure you do anytime you get around Mario again. It's like, wait a minute, this is this was pretty great, and I was fortunate enough to be part of it. But there were so many, and we still do that, because one of the things I still do with the organization is work with our alumni. We try to help them transition into life after the game. So we still have a very good interaction with those guys.
Well, that's a great story. I wasn't aware of that. Thanks for sharing that, Kevin. I have one great Jack Lambert story. He used to hang around our dressing room because he liked Alfie Samuelson. They would compare Alfie to Jack, the way they played. Do you have any good Jack Lambert stories that you could share, or one in particular?
Jack was, again, he didn't come around the football part of it too much afterwards. And, he was one game we were playing up in Katanning, again, one of those, they called it the celebrity team, but we play, like coach group teams would get alumni together and play. And Jack was the referee, believe it or not, because he lived up in the Katanning world. And, just in between periods, just talking to him, saying, "Hey, Jack, Mr. Rooney would love to see you. Come on around." And he'd like to keep to himself, other than maybe showing up for some skating here and there. I remember when Coach Knoll passed away, they had the early viewing, and I get to the parking lot, and Jack's sitting out in his car, his pickup truck out in the corner, because he didn't want to be mixed up in the crowd. He wanted to come pay his respects and then move on. And I walked up, said, "Hey, Jack, how's it going?" He goes, "You couldn't get a better tie than that." You know what I mean? Just like, "Good to see you too." No, but he was unique. And, when you hear stories about how Jack was picked and how that team was great. That era was great. And, again, we look back on it, and during that era, there was no free agency. So whoever drafted you, you were with that team. And that, you could say that they couldn't leave, but you couldn't bring anybody from the outside. So again, I go back to the decisions that Art Rooney Jr. made in putting those great teams together. Boy, that year, they end up with 5 Hall of Famers in one draft class, which was unique.
It is
And
amazing.
Jack was a big part of that. But I wish he would have spent more time in that football, because I would have loved to pick his brain about it. But even like after the hockey, he didn't want to talk too much about that. He just wanted to be Jack and have a little bit of fun.
Yeah. What goes into the decision-making process when you draft a player that's not at the upper echelon in terms of competition? So let's use Ben Roethlisberger. What goes into the decision-making? He wasn't playing at a blue blood program when you drafted him. What goes into that? How complicated is that?
Well, in Ben's situation, he was an underclassman at Miami of Ohio, but he was sticking out at the MAC level. I mean, he stood out at the MAC level physically. He was, bigger than you needed. He was athletic. He obviously had the arm talent, and he could really make some plays. But he made a lot of plays outside the system. I mean, he could make a play that maybe someone else couldn't. So he stood out, like we talked about Marpet earlier. Ben stood out at the MAC level. Now, he had one game where when he got outside the MAC, I believe it was against Iowa, he threw 3 interceptions. And we're like, okay, wait a minute. He stepped outside of the MAC, and he didn't have a good game. But then he'd remind you that his sophomore year against Michigan, he had a good game. So he stood out. His talent stood out. And that year, there were 3, we didn't know, Hall of Fame caliber quarterbacks. We knew there were 3 special quarterbacks in Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, and Ben. And we were picking 11th. We never ever thought that Ben would make it down to us at 11. And as we went through the draft preparation, we talked through all the scenarios, and never once did we say, Ben's going to be there, don't worry about it. And I'll never forget, but Coach Cowher made the point, because we were coming off a season when Tommy Maddox was doing some good things for us. And, Tommy had suffered a neck injury that was a little scary, but he got himself back, and we say, look, we can win because we did win with Tommy. But, Coach Cowher said, listen, if a great quarterback like Ben gets to us for the good of the organization, we have to take them. And I was like, we agree, and let's go. And fortunately, Ben made it to us because the other two were gone at that point.
Right. What's interesting that's so similar in 1990 draft, the first one I was ever part of, the first player picked was Owen Nolan. The second player picked was Peter Nedved. The third player picked was Keith Fremo. The fourth player picked was Mike Ricci. And with the fifth pick overall, Craig Patrick decides to take a kid from Kladno in the Czech Republic named Jaromir Jagr. But Kevin, what'll blow you away about this, we had these meetings at the Pan Pacific Hotel in Vancouver. And I was just young, just starting out. And you get a little bit of grinding and you want to show everybody how smart you are. And so I kept saying, why are we talking about these other players? The best player in this draft is Jaromir Jagr. And so that morning we go down the escalator to go to the bus that's taking us to the draft. And I know you did a lot of scouting in the CFL in Vancouver in the brand new indoor stadium. 50,000 people were at the draft. It was amazing. So we're getting into the bus and Scotty pulls my jacket and he says, I need to talk to you. So I go, okay, Scotty, what's up? He goes, you better be effing right. Because if not, you're going to have the shortest career ever. I'm like, oh, man. So we got Jaromir, and it was amazing. And it kind of takes me back when I hear you tell that Roethlisberger story. It's pretty similar.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, because again, you do the math, and okay, we're five, but he's better than the other four in your opinion. And I'm sure Craig valued that opinion because you had given him not only an opinion, but some evidence as to why you had that opinion. And when Jaromir made it, I'm sure you guys were excited, and obviously he's a generational talent that helped you win and helped the cups and all that. I mean, I'm sure that was fun. And that was, when I look at your game, we get college football. We got one group to really select from. There's some international players now, but nothing to the effect that you guys had to scout the world. And you had to scout colleges, and you had to scout juniors, and you had to scout people overseas. So how you put that together year in and year out, that's got to be a challenge.
It was a lot of fun. You got to be organized. There's no question. You got to like to travel too. Here's a question I have for you that I've never talked to you about before. How important is the interview when you're sitting down with the draft prospect before the draft in your eyes?
Yeah, very, very important. And, that's the first time. A lot of times, I mean, we watch miles and miles of film. We watch games. We watch practices. But we don't interact with that player until their college eligibility is up. And it's always exciting because you want to meet the person under the helmet. And that first impression, boy, it's hard not to take that into consideration. And usually sometimes it's at the Senior Bowl or the East-West game where we have access to the players. Most times it's at the Combine where we get a 20-minute interview with 45 out of 330 players. We pick 45 to talk to. And again, sometimes in 5 minutes, okay, this guy's got it or he doesn't. And sometimes you're like, you don't have enough time. And then you can schedule another interview. Teams can bring 30 guys in for a pre-draft visit. They're up to, I think that ends the end of this week. So you just try to continue to learn and grow, and you piece what you're seeing and interacting with, and you add that to the interviews that you did with coaches and trainers and equipment managers throughout the scouting process. You heard things, but now you get to see it and interact with it. Couple that with, we did some psychological evaluations as well. And again, like the analytic world, that wasn't a final decision maker, but it was a piece of the information. And if it matched what we felt about the player, it was very important. But that interview, it was always enjoyable because I knew that the mistakes we had made in the past, were misjudging the hearts and the smarts. So we better get that part right.
What did you enjoy the most about your job in the National Football League?
I enjoyed being on the college campus and interacting and doing the scouting work. As a GM, I still chose to go out and get on the campuses because not that we didn't trust our people, but I wanted to see it myself. I wanted to be and be on that campus and interact with those folks. And honestly, like people ask me, like, what do you miss? Do you miss it? And I said, I miss being on the campuses because I liked that. And that was my way to escape all the 24/7 that you have to do as a GM, dealing with whatever headachy type stuff goes along with it. When you get out on that road and get out and enjoy being with the people, enjoy watching the practices and the video and watching the players work, that's what part I enjoyed the most for sure.
Everybody dreams about winning a championship. In '06, when you won your first Super Bowl, what was that emotion like for you?
The emotion was overwhelming, as I'm sure, you experienced with that first cup. And the one thing that I kept saying to myself, and I kept saying to our players in the locker room in Detroit, was this can never be taken away from you. You just earned something that will always be yours. And, the real emotion hit me when we beat Denver. And, we're kneeling down for the team prayer after the game, and I'm crying like a baby. And Coach Dick Hoke, who had won 4 previously with the Steelers, the great, running back coach, he looks at me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, Coach, this is great. I mean, this is, wow, we're here." Because we had lost some AFC championship games and got denied. And just to feel like we're there. Now, again, taking that one more step and, beating Seattle in the Super Bowl, of course, that was the icing on the cake. But that's the one thing, and I'm sure you said the same thing, is we're champions forever. That can never be taken away.
One of the cool parts about winning the Stanley Cup is everybody's name goes on it. Like, I know the Lombardi Trophy, I don't believe that happens. There's a new one every year, correct?
There's a new one every year, but on the back of the Steeler trophies where our names are on it.
Oh, that's cool.
All the players and all the coaches and all the, the front office folks, everybody's name is on those particular trophies.
Oh, see, that's great. So I wanted to share this one with you. So we win in '91 and we lose the cup in Tommy Barastro's backyard in Swickley, Pennsylvania. There was no keeper of the cup then. Eventually we found it. And then the next year we win it, and I don't know, but Scotty Bowman and I have it in our car from the airport back to our apartment in downtown Pittsburgh. And our apartment is surrounded by people, and it's like 2:30 in the morning. So Scotty says to the driver, "We're not going in here. Take us to the Marriott Hotel across the street, and I know you know where it is." I think we've had breakfast there before together.
Absolutely.
And so I get out of the car, and Scotty goes, "I've had this too many times. You take it upstairs to your room." So I took the Stanley Cup to my room in the hotel. And what I did that whole night, I just had a beer or 2 or 3, and I read every name, Kevin. I read every name on the cup and in the inside of the bowl. And that was my moment to celebrate. Even though we had won it the year before, that was my, like, I can't believe I'm here doing this. It's surreal.
It's amazing. Yeah, because you're like, I'm sure when you were doing it, you're like, wow, look at all these names. A lot of great players, coaches, scouts, everybody's like, wow, I'm going to be on there, and I get to see this and hold this. It is a moment, and you don't understand it until you have that moment. Quick story, we were flying back from Detroit, and after having won the Super Bowl and the trophies getting passed back, and as we land, my wife and I were in the last row, and it ended up when we landed, Janice was holding the trophy in that last seat, and I said, "Don't you dare drop it." You know what I mean? I said, "Listen, as soon as we land, let's get it right back up front, so when we get off this plane, the Rooneys will have it in their hand." But it just happened that it got passed back throughout the flight. But that was, just one of those, again, cool moments.
One of the things I've really admired about you is how much of a family man you are. You talk about Janice, you've talked to me about your children before. How hard is it to balance being a father, being a husband, and still work in professional sports?
Yeah, and you lived it too. I mean, the life on the road, people think it's sometimes glamorous, but you're not traveling, you're working and you happen to be away. And that's, when you get into the personnel world, the coaching world, the media world, you're not home, and that's an acceptable part. Doesn't mean it's easy. I was in pro football for 38 years, and based on Marriott points and time away, I probably was gone 10 years. And I'm not talking about flying to or flying back. I'm talking about not being home, and you lose family time. And again, having a great foundation at our home, and Janice taking care of our kids while I was gone, it's not easy. I'm not saying that everybody doesn't have hard work. A lot of people spend a lot of time away from their families. In our business, it was mandated. I was looking at an old travel calendar from back in 1987. I'm like, man, I wasn't home, and that's just part of it.
I did that the other day. I was looking at my schedule from the 2006 season after we had the nuclear winter, and I don't think I was home more than 100 days that year.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
And
I don't know how my wife. I don't know.
Those days are gone, and that's you can't get them back. And again, we all accepted that, and again, we're not the only ones that to try to work hard and had to put in hours, but it was a challenging part for sure.
Do you have a take on the National Hockey League season this year? Do you have a take on who might win the Stanley Cup? Because I know you're a passionate fan. I know you are.
I know, and it's I can't really tell because I don't see a lot of the West until we get into the, you start watching the playoffs in more detail. I love what the Penguins have been able to do this year. They retooled, and they started over. Of course, they still have that great core, with Sidney and Gino and Chris Letang, and then all of a sudden Erik Karlsson's playing superb. And then they've added, I've watched what Kyle has done, and he's added a lot of pieces. They hit on it looks like they hit on the first round pick in Kindle, and he could be something for him. Made in nice trades and some free agent additions, but it really looks like they've come together. I spent one day with him in training camp just to, he invited me over, and it was great. Got to meet Coach Muse, and he seemed excited. And, he was going into he's replacing a legendary coach in Mike Sullivan. And boy, you knew that would be challenging. But boy, right now, I don't know if anybody wants to match up with them come playoffs. They had one little lull prior to the Olympic break where they went into, or the holiday break, I believe. They went into a little bit of a losing funk, but they found their way out of it. And, they're fun to watch. I think they're very dangerous. I can't say I know enough about the rest of, especially the West. I can touch base in the East a little bit, but it's always exciting. Playoffs they're great.
I can't wait. I know you're coming down to my neck of the woods next week. I can't wait to spend time with you. Hopefully we'll be able to watch a couple of hockey games, but I know we're going to golf, and I can't wait to do that. I can't wait to do that with you. Kevin, this has been so delightful. You've given us so much amazing intel and storytelling that has been so helpful. So appreciate you joining us here on Inside the Game.
Oh, hey, Pierre, thanks. Always great to catch up. You and I can do this anytime if we can share some stuff with some folks for a little bit of fun. But, I think what I always try to do when interacting with folks like yourself is learn something and, learn about what we did, and maybe we can pass it on to that next generation.
Kevin, thanks a lot. I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching another edition of Inside the Game, the legendary Kevin Colbert, General Manager Emeritus for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Thank you.